Hello and welcome to Conversations for Good. I'm John Olajide, founder and CEO of Axxess, a Dallas-based company that is a leader in home healthcare technology. Last year, as the 2020 chair for the Dallas Regional Chamber, one of my priorities was to highlight how business can be a force for good. It's something that's always been incredibly important to me and something about which I am deeply passionate. Conversations for Good features business and community leaders and entrepreneurs who embody what it means to use business as a force for good. Today, it's my honor to welcome my good friend, T.D. Jakes, Bishop at the Potter's House, who's also an entrepreneur and philanthropist. Bishop Jakes, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a real pleasure.
To say your ministry is impactful is an understatement. The Potter's House is one of the largest churches in the country and operates every day as a force for good. I know that firsthand. Today, I'd like to discuss what you've learned about continuing your important work through a crisis like we've all never seen before, and what others can learn from that. Bishop Jakes, welcome again, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Where can I begin? I think that, first of all, it's important to understand that the church, particularly in our community, is the epicenter of the community. It is more than the place from which we draw inspiration for faith, but it is also where we congregate, have fellowship, have emotional support. It is the place that we look to for guidance and direction and cohesiveness. It's our country club. It's where all of our R&B singers came from. It's where the civil rights movement was born. It's so many different things than it is for other ethnic groups. It is for us. So for the church to shut down, it didn't just mean that our worship was jeopardized, but also our sense of cohesiveness and our sense of stability emotionally, mentally, spiritually, were all compromised. And the challenge became, how do you maintain getting the message out to the people who need it, and the support, and beyond the message itself, the whole atmosphere, the congregation, the connectivity that calms people in a crisis, not to mention the fact that I have 300 employees, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to keep them in a pandemic with the doors closed.
Wow, that's powerful. Bishop, you jumped right into how COVID impacted you. So what I want to take us a step back a little bit. You're a global personality. You're famous around the world. And what I've learned from my famous friends is that as well known as they are, there are always new things to learn about them. So if you don't mind, let's take us back a little bit and tell us about yourself. Just briefly, 2 or 3 minutes, tell us your life story and just summarize that for us. And maybe we'll learn something that we've never heard before.
I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia. I was born in 1957. My parents are from the South. My mother was from Alabama, and my father was from Mississippi. They migrated to West Virginia and settled there and raised their family there. So I'm a native of West Virginia. Moved to Dallas 25 years ago. Got married when I was 22. When I was 24, started pastoring when I was 22. Started preaching when I was 19. I'm working toward 50 years of ministry. Love that. I love the fact that I have also been entrepreneurial all of my life. T.D. Jakes Enterprises, my for-profit company, actually was founded before I came to Dallas. A lot of people don't know that. They think that the enterprise was born out of the Potter's House, but it's absolutely, number one, a separate entity, and number two, much older than the Potter's House, through which we produce films. We have contracts with companies like Sony and others that we've done first look projects for them for a number of years, and have done that grossed about $500 million at the box office over the years. And currently we're doing television projects partly because of the pandemic. And we've been working with Lifetime more recently, producing content for them. I'm an author, 42 books. I'm a father.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
A man of many parts for sure. For
Yes.
sure.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Father, husband, 5 children, 7 grandchildren. Pretty busy life.
You can say that again. Okay. So let's get back to the COVID pandemic and how that impacted you. In my comments, as you've mentioned, the Porter's House is one of the nation's largest churches. And you shared that, before the pandemic, you welcomed thousands of people, and you welcome people from all over the world. I know that. So what was the greatest challenge for you personally, migrating all those worshipers to your televised and online services? And what impact did it have on how you connected with your congregation? So in a COVID world, talk about your experience.
Any given Sunday morning, we may have 60,000 people streaming online.
Wow.
Through YouTube, Facebook, through our app, from all over the world. Generally, we translate our messages into about 45 different languages.
Wow.
So we're pretty global in our outreach. So streaming was not new to us. What was new to us, we didn't have a streaming program for children. So that was new. There was nothing to stream all of a sudden because there was no audience. So I had to be able to walk into an empty room and talk as if it were full. And I did that for almost a year.
Wow.
I taught almost every Bible class, which I normally don't do, but I did throughout the pandemic because I thought it was important to our constituency to hear my voice in the storm.
Yes, yes.
They trust me. They trust my judgment, and I wanted them to hear me in the storm. The other thing was to leverage my external relationships, my business relationships, my access to political entities, to galvanize accurate information. Because as you will recall, all types of erroneous information was being disseminated.
Yes.
And so the onus was on me, I felt, to try to give clear information. I also got on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, talking to the nation through the pandemic at a time there was great fear. And John, you have to realize that the people who were grappling with making the decision about how to respond to the crisis were not being affected as badly as Black and brown people were.
Yep.
So we were disproportionately affected, but we were not represented in the policies and the positions that were being taken. So for me, unlike my white counterparts who were having occasional deaths, we were flooded with deaths. We were flooded with grief. We were flooded with funerals.
Wow.
I had 14 people to die in 12 days.
Wow.
All types of counseling needs. And we had to figure out how to Zoom counsel to families who were grieving. We had to figure out how to do funerals at distances and how to not be able to hug or comfort people who lost their spouses, mothers, or grandmothers. The burnout ratio on my team, my staff, and myself got much higher. And it was stats and numbers to people who watched the news, but they were faces and figures to people like me.
Wow. So you mentioned how it was important for your people to hear your voice and how they needed some calm through the storm. And you've talked about how people needed support, shoulder to lean on. So talk about some of the other needs that you saw arise among your congregation and in the community, really, specifically around the COVID pandemic.
You know, I think of myself as a pastor to the city and to the nation and not just to my congregation. So when I see needs arise, I don't think in the vacuum or the vortex of membership. but just how can I help people in general? And it ranged from hunger, lack of food access. We started delivering food. We started feeding first responders out of our kitchens and delivering to hospital workers late at night where restaurants were closed. The hospital restaurants were closed, and the people who work late at night providing food to them, police officers, right down to delivering groceries to the elderly who were afraid to come outside. The needs were endless, getting people to health care, driving them there. Later on, providing access on our property where they could get to the vaccine. There were so many needs on so many levels. The counseling needs were just astronomical. Across the nation, domestic violence went up, suicide rates went up, depression escalated. We were seeing fallout of marriages, divorce rates increased, trying to stop the hemorrhaging of our, and let me hasten to say that's not over, because trouble doesn't last, but trauma does. And so just because the trouble begins to dissipate doesn't mean that the trauma is gone. And so trauma lingers sometimes for years. And I think it has changed the trajectory of the lives of the American people and people around the world, actually. For years to come, they'll be sorting through emotions that erupted here. The volcano is gone, but the lava is still hot. And it's still flowing and flowing and flowing out. And people don't even know how to identify, diagnose the fact that they are responding to their spouse out of rage or fear or frustration that has nothing to do with their spouse or their child, but it could in fact be a result of losing your job, losing your income, the vulnerability of recognizing that the world as we know it could be shaken.
Wow. You know, you mentioned people losing their jobs, losing income. And I know you're very passionate about workforce issues, Bishop, about making sure people stay employed, stay connected with opportunities. Why don't you talk specifically so this audience knows the incredible work that you do and the foundation does in helping around workforce issues? If you don't mind, talk about that.
You know, I spent a lot of time talking to underserved people in underserved communities who feel like CEOs and business leaders really don't care, that they're just there for profit. They want to make what they can and move on. That elected officials only care when they're trying to get elected. But once elected, they soon forget the people who voted for them. When I actually went and started meeting with CEOs, particularly here in Dallas, I found out that's not always true. That many CEOs do have a real sincere desire to solve the problem, that they even have created programs or allocated resources, but they don't know how to contact the people in the underserved communities.
Yes.
I started TDJ's foundation to be a bridge between supply and demand, between needs and service providers, to create opportunities, not only for the down and out, because stereotypically, when you think of jobless people, especially minorities, you think of poverty and poor education and poor resources. But I have people in my choir with master's degrees that can't find a job. And I listen to CEOs who say, we can't find qualified people to increase our diversity. And it's because there's no bridge to connect them. Not to mention the fact that additionally, the workforce, the blue collar workers, the opening up doors for returning citizens who have been incarcerated. Our Texas Offenders Reentry Initiative has processed over 30,000 formerly incarcerated inmates, taking them through a 2-year program, anger management, GEDs, helping them find a place to stay, trying to direct them toward a job, giving them a way to assimilate back into society. Can be as simple as teaching you what an Apple phone is.
Yeah.
How does that work? How do you answer it? How do you use it? Those things happen all while they were away. Many of these are women. Many of these are grandmothers, mothers, young men, older men, and finding a way to reintroduce them to society is very, very important. Some of them have picked up skills or had skills before. Some of them were first-time offenders. 70% of them were incarcerated for nonviolent crimes. Many of them were incarcerated for things that are no longer a crime. Yet they continue to pay the price of incarceration because of their record. They are not valued, appreciated, or given the opportunities to get back into the workforce. Now, this is hard work because even when the door is open, it's terrifying to walk into a corporation when you have been in a jail cell and then back in your community, and then to learn the language, the lingo, and not feel intimidated. So there has to be some wraparound services provided to help make that possible. I may not have transportation. I may not be able to make a wage that affords a daycare for my kids. We have created a system that makes it easier for people not to work than we do for them to work, because we don't provide the wraparound services that are necessary for people who are starting up the ladder to be able to get in the game and really be a part. I understand that. And I work very hard to make CEOs and executives understand that. And I work very hard to make the people understand that there are opportunities. There is a chance for advancement. I often say, I've never heard of anybody being mugged by somebody who had to go to work in the morning.
Yep, I agree, totally.
So this is more than about feeding their families and taking care of their children. It's about safety. It's about crime. It's about making people want to or not want to move into a city. It has a lot to do with your drawing power, your staying power, and generationally, it recycles itself from generation to generation. So a father who has no job and has no income models that in front of his son. And the son is going to school, taking classes that he feels like, I don't see any use for this in the life that I see around me. Why should I learn how to code? Why should I learn technology? I'm not exposed to technology. We don't even have Wi-Fi. So exposing them through our STEM program and our STEAM programs through our foundation, and partnering with CEOs to even let them be in the room to see what that looks like, to see people who look like them, and to have that every area that has been advertised to underserved communities, they've excelled in. Sports has been advertised, they've excelled in it. To a disproportionate degree, excelled in it. Music has been advertised, they've excelled in it. Hip hop has been advertised, they've excelled in it. Acting has been advertised, they've excelled in it. Technology has not been advertised. Corporations have not been advertised. We do not see that when you live in the hood. And so to expose them is to empower them.
Yes. Bishop, those are just very, very powerful words. And I know firsthand about the work the TDJX Foundation does, and I am glad that you're sharing that with this audience. And Axxess is a proud partner, proud supporter of that work, and we're grateful for the opportunity to be a part of that. For this audience, I just want you to know, if you're enjoying this fascinating conversation and all this wisdom from Bishop Jakes, please like and share this conversation and share that with as many people as possible so they can be a part of this. Okay, let's switch gears now, Bishop, and talk about George Floyd. Okay, so we were in the throes of the pandemic, really only a couple of months into it, really, when our nation faced another crisis with the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So what responsibility did you feel as the leader of your church, your congregation, and a leader in this community and a leader globally at that time when all that happened?
The horrific tragedy that happened to George Floyd was not something new to our community. It was new to our nation. There are thousands of George Floyds that don't make the press. This one did, just because of one courageous young girl taking the footage, and because of social media, it not being filtered out of the news cycle, it drew attention that the nation could not ignore. The reality is our communities live with George Floyd-like situations all the time. However, the blatant cruelty of the George Floyd murder created a conduit to reignite a conversation that we've been trying to have for years. And whenever we tried to talk about it, no one believed us. We get caught up on semantics, you know, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. All lives matter, no, blue lives matter. If you say anything against the police, you're a police officer, you're against all police officers. We get in these nuanced ideologies that circumvent an opportunity to find solutions. Firing a drunk pilot doesn't mean you don't like airlines. Getting rid of a bad contractor doesn't mean that you're against builders. But yet when it comes to certain things, we seem to think it's all or nothing. George Floyd gave us a platform to have a conversation where even police officers were saying, this is too far. So that took away the excuse of feeling like I have to be loyal to police. I pastor police officers, lots of them. In my church, we fed them during COVID. George Floyd made the nation have to see what we see all the time. And it was shocking to them. To us, however, I think the thing that stood out to me, and I don't live in the hood, but I grew up poor, very, very poor, and I understand the dynamics. And I came from a neighborhood that would be considered the hood for where I lived. For us, it was the vindication of now you believe me. And to see Black people and brown people and white people marching together was extremely emotional. It was the same kind of emotion that a child who suffered sexual abuse has when their parent finally believes the story that they've been telling them all the while.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. You know, so continuing on that theme, we know the aftermath, as you shared, of George Floyd's death felt like a time of reckoning, you know, a release to many. So 1 year in, 1 year later, Bishop, do you think that was accurate? And what progress do you think has been made since then from your perspective?
There has been a little progress made. There have been a lot of promises made. We are dealing with whether to keep or to lessen the power of qualified immunity. There's been more brought to the surface about how the unions go beyond protecting the welfare of the police officers on the job to interfering into the judicial system. We've discovered an unmasked and invisible system that coordinates and collaborates and creates a continuity for police overstepping their bounds. And I think there needs to be more done in that regard. I think that the corporations who have allocated resources need to be held accountable, because I am not seeing the deployment of those resources in a way that has been totally impactful to the community. A lot of things are said in the moment that sound good, but when the moment passes, we acquiesce back to business as usual, because that's not what you do every day. Not assigning a task force to make sure that those resources are actually being used and that there are results taken. is one of the other things that the foundation has taken on, that we can track those resources and track results, what did work, what didn't work, what are the best practices, not only here in Dallas, but nationally, because we want to see this problem resolved. The even bigger than resources to the recipients, the bigger issue is accountability to the elected officials. The bully pulpit that CEOs have to make this be on the agenda of the elected officials cannot be measured. Yeah. And in reality, until the CEOs rise up and say, this is important to us, doing good for the company, doing good, that's great. But using your bully pulpit to make sure that the policies that are in place reinforce diversity, inclusion, and equity beyond your corporate walls. And like, I cannot just say, I'm concerned about feeding my members and not people that are non-members. CEOs have to also say, I'm concerned that diversity, inclusion, and equity become a national initiative and not just a corporate one. And I'm only going to elect officials, empower officials, donate to officials who are equally committed to seeing this happen. That's the change that we're waiting to see.
Bishop, thank you for your comments there. And that's why we're having a conversation like this, about how business can and should be a force for good. And that's what I hear you say loud and clear. I know you believe that deeply, and you're advocating for other business leaders to be that way as well. And I really appreciate the comment, the statement that the Business Roundtable put out a couple of years ago, that beyond just making a profit, businesses should make their communities better. It's a stakeholder model, and that's what you're talking about here. And I am sure that there are people, not just business people, individuals that reach out to you saying, how can I help? How can I be a part of the solution? So what do you tell them?
There's a lot. Supporting the foundation, helping us to do summer camps for kids, which Texas Instruments, Microsoft has to some degree helped us to do. We set out to get 500 kids hooked up during the pandemic into a STEAM program, and it ended up with 5,000. There's a great hunger out there for that sort of thing. But it's not just that. It is on a top level with CEOs. They can pick up the phone, they can make a phone call, say, this is what I want on the agenda of whoever I'm going to support as a candidate, to people on a grassroots level, making sure, go through your office and look. It's not, do you have diversity, but where? Are they in any positions of influence or power? Are they heard? Or are they just polite to keep their job? Creating an atmosphere where people can really have an honest conversation of what it is like for them to be in your atmosphere. Inviting them into your space, going into their space, so that you understand the people that you employ, you understand their lives. If I had Asian members, I would want to understand their lives so that I could address them more effectively. Whatever it is, let's not assume that because we live in the same city, we're having the same experience. That because we have a great experience in Highland Park with a police officer doesn't mean that the same type of police officer is in South Dallas. That naivety, that what I call willful blindness.
Wow.
It is a willful blindness. Wow. Because it's ugly and nobody wants to see it. But we need to do the work consciously to make sure that we've integrated our workplaces, that we have integrated our lives. Who do you fellowship with? Let me see your cell phone. How many diverse numbers are in the phone? Who do you talk to? And without even being conscious of it, we can alienate certain types of people and or genders and or ages.
Or even socioeconomics.
Those socioeconomic levels have a whole lot to do with bringing people in and allowing them to have an experience. And what I'm most worried about, John, is long term, if we're going to have the kinds of human resources that are going to be necessary to make Dallas a viable city, we're going to have to solve these problems, because these problems will cause people to choose other cities that have less resistance, better schools, lower crime, better opportunities. And particularly amongst the younger people, they are not as profit driven as they are cause driven. And so having these causes and really becoming engaged draws talent into our city that we desperately need in order to thrive and to grow.
I love that. So Bishop, let's talk about recovering from the pandemic and, with the COVID vaccines. And we know that with the development of the COVID vaccine, one of the biggest challenges was making sure people had access to it.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the Porter's House teamed up with the city of Dallas to create a vaccination site.
Yes.
So tell us about how that partnership happened and why you thought that was important.
Well, let me back up a little bit and start with the fact that I myself went and got the vaccine because I knew that if I did not do that, one, I wanted it. Number two, I knew if I didn't get it, there would be doubt. We were very skeptical. And Black people are skeptical of doctors dating all the way back to the Tuskegee experiment. Yes. We're with the gonorrhea and all of that.
The history,
yeah, all through history, we have been guinea pigs for trials. That has lingered in the skepticism from generation to generation. And it is still a problem today. So we had two problems. Access to the vaccine was one, and then fear of the vaccine was the other. I took the vaccine locally, and then I got on Dr. Oz and aired the vaccination so the nation could see I was taking the vaccine. I also hooked up with the National Ad Council and became a spokesperson for the vaccination and the importance of it and the significance of it. Even with all of that and all the other pastors, lots and lots of pastors, leaders around the country have done the same thing. There is still a skepticism that worries me. We should be further. We should be faster. And we need to come together and put our heads together to solve the problems that's stopping us from solving this, because this problem unresolved won't stay in the Black community. It doesn't care about zip codes. It will migrate. If it migrated from China and through Europe and all the other countries, Australia and all over the world, then it will migrate from South Dallas. So none of us are fully safe until all of us are safe. And that's why we have to give the most earnest heed to coming together and being collaborative. And I think that the virus is teaching us something, that we need to build systems that don't just bring us together in times of panic. We need to have coalitions that stay together all the time, working on problems collaboratively to bring about ultimate good. And when we put those teams together, we have to be careful that we don't diversify the team, but then dominate the diversity. Because if you dominate the diversity, you might as well not have it. If I'm muted and you can't hear me, you might as well not have it. Creating an atmosphere where everyone can really talk, respected voices. Because my theory is when reasoned people stop talking, unreasonable people take over. Yep. They scale walls, they burn down buildings, they riot, they try to climb into the White House, they burn down grocery stores. All of that is a symptom of reasonable people not solving problems. And if we leave those problems in the hands of the most enraged people, we're going to get the most horrific results.
Wow. So as we continue on this path of recovery, you've shared your concerns about, the low rates of vaccination. So I'll ask you a two-part question. What more needs to be done? How does that work evolve still? And then the second part of the question is, as we're thinking about this recovery, are you hopeful that the recovery can be more inclusive, or that you see any signs that this recovery can be more inclusive for communities where there's been a lot of distortions?
I am hopeful. I think the more that we start to regulate, and I believe in free speech, and I think it's very important, but the more we hold accountable social media not to disseminate destructive information that can cause us to all die. I have freedom until my freedom infringes on your life. And we have to get a grip on some of the information that disseminates. And we're working on that. That's getting better. I think we need to continue to work on that to make sure it's better. And when it's not right, we need to call it out and not make a scientific issue a political one. We have to dispel that. The second thing, that once we get rid, everything pivots around truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Yeah.
When the truth becomes ambiguous, there is no liberty. So we have to get back to a solid truth. Wow. This is right, this is wrong, this works, this doesn't work. And if we do that, truth consistently applied creates trust. But if we don't get truth consistently applied, we won't have trust. And so the onus is upon all of us, from the beauty shop to the pulpit to the news anchor, to make sure that we all continue to say the same thing and model the behavior we want to see repeated until it happens. I do think it's changing. I do think as we advertise what all people can do who have the vaccination, it's modeling the behavior that you want to see multiplied.
Wow. Bishop, because of your leadership, the Potter's House has always provided important community programs. Now, with the pandemic, are there new priorities now that you're working on?
There are lots of things we're working on. Not so much the Potter's House, but I have a for-profit company called T.D. Jake's Real Estate Ventures. One of the big things I'm working on now is workforce housing. The people who work in our cities can no longer afford to live in our cities. The gentrification of our neighborhoods is causing our help, our firemen, our police officers, our nurses aides, our janitors in the hospital to live further and further out. And I think that we have to have a collaborative focus on creating workforce housing in a way that creates upward mobility. Home ownership is critical to the aggregation of wealth. And that is something that has eluded us for quite some time. And as the market continues to escalate for real estate, it also continues to alienate. And it all by itself has the power to discriminate, simply because people are locked out not only by the color of their skin, but more aptly because of the lack of the resources. I'm not talking about people who are on government assistance. I'm talking about people who work for the CEOs that are listening at me right now, can't afford to buy a house in the city. I'm talking about people who make $80,000, $100,000 a year and still cannot afford the escalating rates of mortgage payments. This is madness. So our company is trying to take advantage of opportunity zones and TIFs and government allocations to reconstruct, redevelop community development in not only in Dallas, but across the country. And we currently are working on several spots in Dallas. And we're also working on Atlanta and Chicago and several other cities, because this is actually a global problem, incidentally. When I talk to people in Kenya, when I talk to people in the Caribbean, it is a global problem. And we need partners. I plead with partners that may be listening at me right now to make it possible for people to access proper housing, whether they're renting or with a long-term view of owning, to bring down the cost of first-time home ownership, the down payment. Maybe I can afford to make the payments, my credit is good, but I don't have the down payment. We've got to remove some barriers for people to be able to aggregate wealth, because nobody's marching. They might be marching, but nobody's breaking out windows and robbing CVS who has a good job.
Yep.
We can't tell fathers not to be deadbeat dads and not give them good jobs.
Bishop, you clearly you have a burden for people that you've had your whole life. And
Yes.
you've led and you're doing all that. So I've got a question for you. I know you want to help with housing. You're doing workforce issues. If you were to share that one thing that keeps you up at night, what would it be? Because that's a question I get asked a lot. That's a question that leaders get asked a lot. But for you, what keeps you up at night?
The biggest word I know in the entire dictionary is exposure. That is the biggest word I know. And that is the word that keeps me up at night. You cannot be what you cannot see. And I want to create windows where people who cannot look into the worlds that you call normal to see into them. I was in a big meeting at Martha's Vineyard, and they were talking about Goldman Sachs was there, and all of these Fortune 100 companies and top tier companies across the country were there. And they were talking about creating job opportunities for underserved communities. I said, that's great. The only problem is I have never run into a little black boy or girl who said, I want to work for Goldman Sachs, or I want to grow up and work for Texas Instruments, or I want to grow up and be a CEO. You know why they don't say that?
Because they've never seen it.
They've never seen it.
Yeah.
They've never seen it. And as long as they don't have summer programs, apprenticeship programs, open up doors, exposure, as long as they don't come into your world and you come into their world and volunteer and loan out executives who teach classes, who teach courses, who volunteer to do things, as long as they don't get exposed to it. My father couldn't buy a nice house. We couldn't live in a good neighborhood. But every Sunday he would drive us past them. And I can remember being a little boy sitting in the back seat of the car, wondering what success looked like in my color. I had never seen in my entire life somebody who looked like me, who had a nice house.
Wow.
I had never seen it. I couldn't imagine it. And it is very difficult to aspire to something where you are not represented.
Bishop, you and I can go on and on and on. I always love just listening to you. But we've got time, and I know you've got a lot of important things to do all over the world. So do you have any closing thoughts on how everyone can be a force for good?
I understand, yes, I'll close with this. I understand quite clearly why corporations tend to connect with elected officials and avoid faith leaders. I understand that. In normal circumstances, I get it completely. The risk of it, the nuances of it could be detrimental. But when it comes to communities of color, I don't think you can avoid us. And what we have to do is create things like the foundation that are separate from the church. But unlike any other people group, we need to partner together to create a better Dallas.
Yes.
The executives you're looking for of color, we know them. The underserved that you're looking for, we know them too. And creating a bridge between us while maintaining our own uniqueness is possible.
Yes.
They do it all over the world. We can do this. And I think if we work together, we have always had CEOs working with elected officials. We've always had elected officials working with churches. We have never had community leaders, elected officials, corporate leaders, and clergy, people of faith, working together. That four-legged table would level the playing field, tear down the barriers, open up access to needed land that we have in Dallas that we don't touch because it's in the wrong zip codes, and create upward mobility for all. We don't want to eat into your pie. It is not just 6 slices. This is big enough that we can create more pies if we have more people. So it's not about giving away. We're not asking you to lose something. We're saying together we could gain something. So I would love the opportunity to sit with you along with others and talk about ways that my grandchildren and my children and my great-grandchildren could have the advantages that I have. I am afraid if the wrong voices come to power, I will have done well. And yes, you can name people of color who have done well, but the very fact that you can name them, the very fact that you can name Oprah and Will Smith and T.D. Jason, a handful of others, is a sign that there's not many of us. There are 40 million Black people in America. You shouldn't be able to name a few of us. You can't name a few white people. So let's level the playing floor. Let's put the 4 legs together, each with its own uniqueness, and then create a flat table. Because when the floor is flat and the rules are clear, we do well. Basketball, flat floor, rules clear, we do well. Football, flat floor, rules clear, we do well. If we get into business and the floor is flat and the rules are clear, we can do well, and we won't have to have a Black Wall Street. We can have a Wall Street that we all can walk together in.
Bishop, thank you so much. And I just want to say, Axxess is a proud partner of the TDJX Foundation. I want everyone to hear me say that loudly. And I have learned and grown through that partnership. I've learned and grown through our relationship. And I encourage all other organizations to do that as well. We are so proud of that partnership and look forward to continuing to support for many years to come.
Thank you.
Bishop, thank you so much for your time today and for all the work that you're doing to make our world a kinder, and more connected place. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
And then if you've enjoyed this conversation, please like and share this video and join us in the conversation on how business can be a force for good, how you can be a force for good as well. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. I look forward to many more conversations like this in the future. This has been amazing. Bishop, thank you again.